Welcome students. This session is for BA second year, English Literature paper second, that is prose and fiction. In this paper you have short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, Dr. Heidegger's Experiment. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on July 4th, 1804, Salem, Massachusetts, and he died May 19th, 1864, Plymouth, New Hampshire. So he is a famous novelist and a short story writer of America. Before we start with the story, Dr. Heidegger's Experiment, let's have a look at life and works of this famous short story writer. Nathaniel Hawthorne is an American novelist and short story writer who was a master of allegorical and symbolic tales. By allegorical and symbolic, we mean that writer, in a very nice manner, he represents the hidden meaning of human nature through this short story of his. One of the greatest fiction writers in American literature, he is best known for Scarlet Letter, 1850, and The House of the Seven Gables, 1851. So these are two quite famous works of this American writer, and both of these are fiction. Hawthorne grew up in their house in Salem and for extensive periods during his teens in Raymond, Maine, on the shores of Sebago Lake. So most of the time of his lifetime he has spent in this place. He returned to Salem in 1825 after 4 years at Bowdoin College. So after completing his college, he returned to this place. He spent nearly a dozen years reading and writing to master the art of writing fiction. So this place has got to do a lot in making of him as a writer. So in these 12 years especially, he has spent a lot of time reading and writing fiction. He looked back upon these years as a period of dream-like isolation and solitude spent in a haunted room. And we see the effect of this magic and the supernatural things in his short stories also. And because he has spent a lot of time in isolation and solitude. During these solitary years, he learned to write tales and sketches that are still unique. His stories, when we read them, they're quite unique in themselves. Hawthorne died in his sleep in 1864 during a tour of White Mountains in Plymouth, New Hampshire. So this is the place where he breathed his last, and he died in 1864. Let's see what is there in this story, Dr. Heidegger's Experiment. Just to introduce this story to you, Dr. Heidegger Experiment is a short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne about a doctor who claims to have been sent water from the fountain of youth. So there's a doctor, Dr. Heidegger, and he says that somebody has sent him some water from fountain of youth. Hawthorne intends to show in his short story that if people were ever to be given the opportunity to go back in time, they would also revert back to all the behaviors that characterized them at the time. So he makes this story sort of an experiment, and here Hawthorne tries to reveal to the readers that if there is some sort of an experiment or time machine or some sort of a magic that can take people back to their earlier days or back in their youth, they are going to practice all those behaviors and characteristics that were there in them when they were in their youth age. In essence, people would likely not change. So it's not this that when a person grows in age, the wisdom that he gets and the behavior that he achieves, that is not anywhere a learning experience. If they are given back their youth, they are not going to learn anything from the experience. Rather, they are going to return back to their earlier behaviors that characterized them when they were in their youth age. The story was first published anonymously as The Fountain of Youth in the January 1837 issue of Lewis Gaylord Clark's The Knickerbocker magazine. So first it was published in this magazine, and the topic, or you can say the title of this short story was The Fountain of Youth. It was included later that year in Hawthorne's collection Twice Told Tales. But later in that year, Hawthorne has a collection of short stories, Twice Told Tales, and this collection he included this story, and it was then titled Dr. Heidegger's Experiment. Edgar Allan Poe reviewed the second edition of the collection in 1842 and wrote that Dr. Heidegger Experiment was exceedingly well imagined and executed with surpassing ability. So he is also a famous American writer, Edgar Allan Poe. When he read this story, Dr. Heidegger Experiment, he commented on this this story is very well imagined and put across, and you can see the ability at its supreme when we read this story by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Artist breathes in every line of it. You can see, you can feel the presence of author in every line of the story. The narrator directly addresses the reader and connects himself to the story he's telling, which lends the story a very conversational tone. You see that this story is written in a very conversational style. The narrator, he addresses the reader directly, and he connects himself to the story he's telling. And we see that the narrator and the story is so closely interwoven that a story has a very interesting conversational tone. Now let's start with the text of this story, Dr. Heidegger Experiment. Students, this story is a bit long, but trust me, it's very interesting, and you are really going to enjoy this journey of reading this story. So let's start with the story. That very singular man, old Dr. Heidegger, once invited 4 venerable friends to meet him in his study. So this story introduces Dr. Heidegger, and once upon a time he invited his 4 respectable friends to meet him in his study. There were 3 white-bearded gentlemen, Mr. Medbourne, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne, and a withered gentlewoman whose name was Widow Wycherley. So among these 4 respectable friends of Dr. Heidegger, 3 were men, Mr. Medbourne, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne, and the 4th one was a gentlewoman, and her name was Widow Wycherley. They were all melancholy old creatures. So in a very humorous manner, he calls these 4 friends, because they were old, he doesn't call them as human beings, rather he calls them as creatures who had been unfortunate in life. Their fortune was not a good one, so they had a life full of struggle, and whose greatest misfortune it was that they were not long ago in their graves. So the greatest misfortune of these 4 people was that they were at that stage of their life when they had to be in their graves, but they were still living. Mr. Medbourne, in the vigor of his age, had been a prosperous merchant. So now here he introduces these 4 guests of Dr. Heidegger. The first one is Mr. Medbourne, and when he was in the vigor of his age, when he was young, he was a prosperous merchant, but had lost all by a frantic speculation and was now little better than a mendicant. But because of his judgments, he was not successful, and now his condition was very mendicant, that is, was very poor. Colonel Killigrew had wasted his best years and his health and substance in the pursuit of sinful pleasures. Even this Colonel Killigrew, his life was full of sinful pleasures. He did not pay attention to his health or his life, which had given birth to a brood of pains, and because of this mismanaged life, his life was full of pains, such as the gout. He was suffering from joint pains and diverse other torments of soul and body, and lot of other problems with relation to soul and body he was facing. Mr. Gascoigne was a ruined politician. He was a politician whose career was ruined, a man of evil fame, or at least had been so till the time had buried him from the knowledge of the present generation and made him obscure instead of infamous. So basically, he was not a famous politician, but then again, so much of time has passed that the present generation did not remember him neither in the form of a famous politician nor in the form of infamous one. So basically, he became a hidden personality. As for Widow Shirley, tradition tells us that she was a great beauty in her day. So we know that Widow Shirley was a very beautiful woman when she was young, but for a long while past, she had lived in deep seclusion, but she is now living a very isolated life on account of certain scandalous stories which had prejudiced the gentry of the town against her. Because whole of his life was full of scandalous stories, and the gentry of the town, it went against her, so she was living a very isolated life. So this way he introduces these four characters which is there in this story. It is a circumstance worth mentioning that each of these three old gentlemen, Mr. Medbourne, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne, were early lovers of Widow Shirley, and had once been on the point of cutting each other's throats for her sake. So he gives an information from the past that once upon a time, when they were young, Mr. Medbourne, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne all were the suitors of Widow Shirley. They were early lovers of this lady, and they were so much in rival with each other that they were on the point of cutting each other's throats for this Widow Shirley's sake. And before proceeding further, I will merely hint that Dr. Heidegger and all his four guests were sometimes thought to be a little beside themselves. So again, there is a touch of humor in this. He says that before I proceed with the story, let me tell you that Dr. Heidegger and these guests, they were little beside themselves. That means their mind was not in that usual shape. Rather, they were little beside themselves. And is not unfrequently the case with old people. And he says that this happens with all old people. Their mind does not remain in a very normal condition. Rather, they are little set away from the usual order, when worried either by present troubles or woeful recollections. So this happens with the mind of old people. Either they are worried because of their present troubles or the troubles that have happened in the past. So all these things make their mind a little aside. My dear old friends, said Dr. Heidegger, motioning them to be seated, I am desirous of your assistance in one of those little experiments with which I amuse myself here in my study. So Dr. Heidegger, he asks his guests to sit down, and then he says that he has called all of these four of them over here just to do one of his little experiments, which he usually does in his study room. If all stories were true, Dr. Heidegger's study must have been a very curious place. So here, somewhere, the narrator introduces an element of curiosity for the readers. He says that Dr. Heidegger's study was not a common study room, but it was a curious place. It was dim, old-fashioned chamber, festooned with cobwebs and besprinkled with antique dust. It was a place where the light was not proper. It was quite darksome. It was old-fashioned room. It was all festooned with cobwebs. You could see a lot of cobwebs and besprinkled with antique dust. So it was not properly cleaned. There was a lot of dust which was there in that place. So somewhere this image gives us that magical environment of this place. Continuing with the description of Dr. Heidegger's study room, the narrator says that around the walls stood several oaken bookcases. So all around the study there were bookcases made of wood from oak tree, the lower shelves of which were filled with rows of gigantic folios and black letter quartos. So he says that the lower shelf of this bookcases, they were full of huge books and black letter quartos. Quartos are the books made from paper folded 4 times. And the upper with the little parchment covered duodecimos. And the upper shelf of this bookcase, it was full of duodecimos. Duodecimos are those papers that are folded 12 times. Over the central bookcase was a bronze bust of Hippocrates. So on the central area, a bust of Hippocrates, who was the father of medicine, the bust was kept there, which was made of bronze, with which, according to some authorities, Dr. Heidegger was accustomed to hold consultations in all difficult cases of his practice. And this gives quite a curiosity in readers, because it's mentioned over here that Dr. Heidegger is taking consultancy about the cases, about the medical cases, from this bust of Hippocrates, that is father of medicine. It is in the obscurest corner of the room stood a tall and narrow oaken closet with its door ajar. In the corner of the room, which was the hidden corner, which was obscurest corner, there was a tall and narrow oak closet. So there was an almirah sort of a closet, and the door was ajar. The door was never closed, within which doubtly appeared a skeleton. And inside this open closet, doubtfully, there was a skeleton kept over there. Between two of the bookcases hung a looking glass. So between the two bookcases, there was a long looking glass over there, presenting its high and dusty plate within the tarnished gilt frame. So it was made of a dusty plate, and even the frame that was gilded was tarnished. It was affected by the weather. Among many wonderful stories related to this mirror, it was fabled that the spirits of all doctors' deceased patients dwelled within its verge. There's a touch of a supernatural element over here, that there are so many wonderful stories related to this mirror that the narrator says that the spirits of doctors' patients, they used to live on the verge of this mirror and would stare him in the face whenever he looked thitherward. And whenever Dr. Heidegger looked in this mirror, the spirits of his old patients, they used to look him in his face. The opposite side of the chamber was ornamented with a full-length portrait of a young lady. So on the opposite wall of this mirror, there was a portrait of a young lady, arrayed in the faded magnificence of silk, satin and brocade. So the kind of dress that the young lady was wearing in that portrait was quite magnificent, and with a visage as faded as her dress. It was an old portrait, so the dress was also faded, and the face, the portrait itself looked quite faded. Above half a century ago, Dr. Heidegger had been on the point of marriage with this young lady. And again, giving us some information from the past, the narrator says that about half a century ago, about 50 years back, if we go, we know that Dr. Heidegger was about to marry this young lady, but being affected with some slight disorder, she had swallowed one of her lover's prescription and died on the bridal evening. So that was quite a torturesome event, that she swallowed some of Dr. Heidegger's prescription, and she died on the day they were about to get married. To analyze the story up till now, the story immediately establishes Dr. Heidegger as a unique and perhaps even strange with its description of him as singular. Right from the beginning, Hawthorne, through his narrator, tries to establish that Dr. Heidegger was somebody who was quite unique, and he was strange, and he was quite singular in himself. The word venerable, which he uses for his guests, means to have respect because of one's great wisdom and age. So venerable word is used for the people who have wisdom and who have age. It's a term then that connects wisdom and age. That it's a term that somewhere with the old age people turn wise, The story to follow will suggest that age and wisdom, however, should not be seen as connected. And soon in the story, we'll come to know that age and wisdom are not connected things, because it's not necessary that with age, wisdom might come. Dr. Heidegger's four friends are all characters whose careers, lives, and reputations were tarnished in some way by mistakes ranging from greed for money or power or sexually scandalous behavior. So, all these four characters, they are introduced to us readers in a way that we come to know that the life of these four characters was tarnished by some way by the mistakes of their youth age, whether it's related to greed for money or power or some sexual scandals associated with their life that they made in their youth. And these were the mistakes they did in their youth age. A typical story might proceed with the idea that each of these old people has learned from their mistakes. If it would have been a normal story, then readers could guess that maybe the story is about people who have learned from their mistakes and who are not going to repeat their mistakes if they are given any chance. Dr. Heidegger is not such a story, but soon readers realize that this story is quite different. His study is a curious place that even the description of the study seems to be founded on rumor, implies that much of the information that the narrator shares may not be more than rumor. So, when narrator gives us the detailed description of the study, we come to know that all the information he is giving to us is on basis of some rumor. So somewhere as readers, we realize that maybe the information or the story that he is telling us can also be just a rumor, and it might not be a real story. Which another way, the narrator seems to constantly cast doubt on the story he is telling, because writer is involving so much of supernatural and so much of mystery in his story that he is putting continuously readers on that level of doubt and rumor and mystery, so that we do not try to search the real grounds in which it's written. We'll continue with the story in my next session.